Oh, doing this case study on Pope Francis. And this is an interesting chart to look at, of course. Popes are interesting people, for sure. And this Pope in particular is, has been a pretty polarizing figure. So we're going to look at his chart, and we're going to look at his overall tendencies. I'm going to read his chart, and then I'm going to look at some of the, what's upcoming, you would say, because he has quite a few issues coming up, especially right now in the Catholic Church. There's so much controversy around his papacy, both his leniency on certain Catholic values, so to speak, which have to do with, he's been more lenient and tolerant toward gays and other, people who had been marginalized, not just gays, but same-sex couples and all of these sort of things. He's been much more liberal. And that's, sort of outraged traditional Catholics, so to speak. And he's also been perhaps, sneaky or devious, at least as it relates to the sex scandals and all like that, as the Catholic Church has been in general. So he's really been, he's tried to be a reformer, but it's been, we live in these very difficult times where in some cases and in some ways, it's hard to see the relevancy of the Catholic Church to some extent, as it's in some ways maybe a bit of an outdated institution even. So let's take a look at his chart. As you can see here, he's Gemini ascendant. Now, again, we can see in his demeanor very, very clear Gemini qualities. He's certainly not this kind of stoic person. He's, smiling a lot. He's very genial, smiles very easily, likes to get out and mix amongst the people a lot. He is, thought of as sort of the people's pope. He likes to get down, at least he used to, and get down in the middle of the people and talk with them, amongst them, and rather than being in the sort of, segregated car or the separate enclosure, he likes to get down with the people. So that's very much a Gemini quality. Of course, Gemini is literally the twins, which shows this understanding of people and wanting to relate equally with people. Gemini is a sign that doesn't necessarily do well, in fact, in hierarchies, hierarchical structures, which is interesting because the church is definitely a hierarchy structure. So we would have to see that in other areas. And indeed, when we start to look at the rest of his chart, we see that he has Mercury, his ruling planet, over here in the 7th house. And it's in Sagittarius. Of course, that's a sign of, literally the sign of religion. It's not really spirituality. Spirituality is Pisces more than Jupiter, more than Sagittarius. But Sagittarius is literally the sign of religion because it's the external and, kind of fired up quality of Jupiter, right? So this, makes perfect sense that he would be, that he puts a lot of his energy into advocating and proselytizing beliefs and belief systems, and that takes the form of religion very easily. Now, so he's got Mercury Jupiter in Sagittarius. Of course, Jupiter is also the ruler. So Jupiter is there, the sun is there. Of course, the sun is the power of everything. And Rahu, the north node, very close to an eclipse. And by the way, I have the charts of many popes. I'm going to do a case study here of eclipses and popes. Many popes were born on eclipses or near eclipses. Popes and kings, monarchs. I made this correlation years ago, but you see they're all born, many of them are born near eclipses relative to how many other people are. So you can see he was born, the Tithi was Chaturthi, so he was born literally 3 days after a solar eclipse in Sagittarius. If we run this chart back, if we run this chart back a few days, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this was the day of the eclipse. It was on this day, because you see this is 29 Scorpio. And that, this is the day of the eclipse. This is when the sun was eclipsed in Scorpio when he was born. This is a solar eclipse. And he was born, he was born on the 17th, right here. So born very close to an eclipse, which was in Scorpio, then the sun changed signs and went into Sagittarius with all of these planets there, also with Jupiter there. It's very important when you really want to understand someone's birth, rather than just go, oh, here's all the placements. Look for significant events like this, right? I didn't know that till I just looked at it. I knew he was born near an eclipse. I glanced over it before we started talking, but I didn't realize that if I did, backed it up, because I'm just not thinking. But of course, it would make sense that it moves it to the last degree of Scorpio. So he was born after the Scorpio eclipse, and when Sun moved into Sagittarius, because he wanted that Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Rahu to all be in Sagittarius. And then he waited until Gemini, ascendant, to be born. So this puts a lot of importance on other people. And of course, being a minister and a guide, and literally the Pope. So again, we could see that spiritual tendency, just having the ruling planet join Jupiter and in Sagittarius with the Sun and Rahu, that would make a person religious for sure. What makes the person the Pope has to be several other factors. Then you have to look at, rulerships and yogas and things like that. That's what gives results in the career, because the Pope is a career, right? It's his work. And so you see that, for him, these dashas, Mars, then he went into Jupiter dasha, then Saturn dasha. You would see that the Saturn dasha would be when he would really start to gain a lot of, Jupiter and Saturn, because of what they rule. Jupiter rules all these planets. Saturn rules Moon and Venus, and particularly Saturn rules his natal Saturn. The nakshatra, Saturn in his own sign. And then he became Pope in Mercury dasha, Mercury dasha. And so this all this energy, concentrated around Jupiter's signs, is very important. Now, Mars also aspects, and this gives him this, this willingness to really get in there and battle and fight for what we know is, or at least what he thinks is right. And that is, making the papacy more accessible and things like that. This is an important thing for him to do. I just looked up that he became Pope on March 13th, 2013. I wanted to bring that up. So let me look at that. March 13th, 2013. March 13th, 2013 would be Mercury Jupiter. That doesn't surprise me. So March 13th, 2013 would be Mars Jupiter. Let's see the third level of that. The third level, that's actually Mercury Jupiter. Let me scroll this up. It's actually the third level is Mercury Jupiter Venus. That's when he became Pope. Okay, and so Venus, let's look and see what Venus rules. So Venus is the ruler of Mercury because it's in Purvashada. Venus is also most particularly the fifth house ruler. So Venus is a very auspicious planet for a Gemini because it rules the fifth house. So he became Pope in Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, right? So this is, again, we always have to look at results based on Raja Yogas because there's a lot of people that, could maybe have the tendencies, but you have to look at the Raja Yogas, which are especially angle and trine lords joined in angular or trinal houses. Those are the most powerful Raja Yogas. So, of course, Mercury, first of all, it rules his ascendant. It also rules Ketu, right? Mercury is in an angle. I'm sorry, Mercury rules the trinal house, which is the first, and it's in the seventh house, which is an angle. That's a Raja Yoga just in itself. It's also joined Jupiter, which is the ruler of two angles. One of them is the 10th house ruler. So again, Mercury Jupiter totally fulfills this Raja Yoga with Jupiter. Mercury is the trine lord in an angle. Jupiter rules Mercury as the trine lord in the angle. And Jupiter is also in its own sign, and it's the 10th house ruler. So when you look at career advancement, you look at the Karaka, which is the sun or Saturn. You look at the house ruler, which is the 10th house ruler. And if they're connected to the ruling planet, like this is happening here, it's off the chart because Jupiter not only rules Mercury, the chart lord, Jupiter's not only the 10th house ruler, but Jupiter also rules the sun, which is the Karaka. So Mercury Jupiter just blew up his career in a good way. So probably as the previous Pope Ratzinger was, deciding to resign or whatever, the rumbling started about Francis, and he was selected on Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. And he got a very good run there for a while. Mercury, Saturn was also very auspicious for him because Saturn is the 9th house ruler in the 9th house. Very powerful planet for him, right? And so all during the rest of his Mercury Dasha, that Mercury Jupiter through Mercury Saturn, there was a lot of grace and benefit, and he was seen, at least publicly, as being very popular. Now we're in Ketu, and there's been all kinds of different things happening, needless to say. Ketu Dasha started in October of 2016. Again, you can just see the difference in grace between Mercury Dasha and the previous Dashas. The Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury Dashas, you can go back since 1964. That's a long time. Again, you can see how Dasha cycles can just catapult someone for decades into prominence. This is why you always have to go back. Like if someone were to rectify this chart and say, well, I don't think he's this, I think he's Cancer or something, right? The Dashas will tell you, because anyone who winds up being Pope, you need to see the yogas that bring it forth. And you also need to, see that there's a, especially for this chain of power and success where he was, cardinal and the bishop and all of the different ranks of the Catholic Church, you would see a sustained, decades of success. And, we would have to see that in order for this to be, to really make sense. And I want to look at this other thing now, which is, I want to look at this scandal. There's a timeline here 3 days ago. So these scandals are really forefront right now. And so these, I just want to look and see. Pope Francis, there was a Pope defrocked Chilean. Pardon me a second here. So there's this, I'm just looking at, well, let me go back to the chart here. But in fact, if people who know the timeline of some of these events, you can help me a little bit too. But I want to look at his chart for certain tendencies and secrecy and things like that, because it's definitely here. I thought I could find pretty quickly what would be a decent timeline for these things exploding. Of course, they're exploding now. And since he's been in his Ketu dasa, so we can look at how the Ketu dasa has changed, especially Ketu Venus. Of course, Venus is the planet of sex, sexuality. Again, you can see in his chart where he has Moon Venus, both in the 8th house, okay? Now, the 8th house is a house of secrets. Well, actually the 12th house, but the 8th house can also be things that are hidden and taboo, and also even potentially scandalous. And it shows where we can either have secrets, be a good keeper of secrets, wind up being, secretive, but also when there are powerful planets in the 8th house, we wind up being very knowledgeable and efficient in how to handle those kinds of situations. Like, for example, a lot of astrologers and metaphysicians have a very powerful 8th house. Here's my chart really quick. You see, I also have Gemini ascendant. I have the 8th house ruler in the 8th house, for example. So I wind up keeping a lot of people's secrets, for example. And yeah, I actually don't have a lot of secrets. Like, I've actually talked about I don't talk about my personal life, private life as it's now happening, because that's just not, I'm an astrologer and I don't feel the need to also expose my secrets. For example, like a lot of people who do even what I do online, they got to tell you everything about themselves all the time. I'm not judging it, but they set themselves up, like talking about their wife and kids and food and what they eat, and like just make their whole secret life or their private life public, right? Just use myself as an example, because the 8th house ruler in the 8th keeps those things together. And astrologers, for example, we wind up keeping a lot of people's secrets, so to speak, but it's not even like a big deal. Like, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but it's very easy to hold powerful secrets like that, particularly when it's Saturn. Gemini winds up often being very good at those kinds of things because Saturn rules the 8th house. Now, his 8th house ruler, Saturn, is very powerful in its own sign. So he is a good keeper of secrets because the 8th house ruler is in the 9th house in its own sign, in Aquarius. So he holds a lot of secrets. And again, when the 8th house ruler is in the 8th, like you saw with my chart, and there's this occult knowledge, usually when the eighth lord is in the eighth house, or Saturn or a powerful planet is in the eighth house, the person is interested in occult knowledge, hidden knowledge. That's all it means by occult. But how they use it, or if they misuse it, or what kind of knowledge would be shown by other factors. So he's good at understanding like the hidden mysteries in life, but having Moon Venus in his eighth house shows that he's been the keeper of a lot of hidden occult knowledge and, let's say, sex abuse knowledge. This totally is literally that kind of energy. It literally shows that he has a lot of secrets, that there's a lot that has happened in the past that he's been likely complicit in covering up, you know, from what he would see, let's say, the good of the church, trying to, and I'm not saying I'm agreeing with it, so don't take any of this to mean that I'm advocating. Again, people get so triggered and say, oh, well, you think it's good or bad. I'm not judging it, I'm just showing. You would almost certainly expect to see something like this with someone who has been around the Catholic Church that long and risen in the ranks that long and has seen and been in positions of authority and power that long, that he has looked the other way. The whole Catholic Church has, amidst all of this sex abuse, which is disgusting. And everyone who's high up in the Catholic Church has been complicit in this, in holding these secrets, keeping these secrets. And this is, you know, you can see very clearly in his chart. Now, I've heard some, and again, it's a tricky thing, some who would say that he has actually perpetrated some of these things himself. I don't know. Venus in this Venus in the eighth house is actually quite powerful. And it's the moon there. Moon Venus conjunction is a lustful placement. Moon Venus is, you know, in many ways quite a lustful placement. It shows that his mind is joined Venus, and Venus is about enjoyment, stimulation, sex, sexuality. Anytime the moon is joined Venus, it joins our mind. Anytime the moon is joined any planet, it joins our mind to that thing. It's literally like our mind is taken over by whatever that planet represents, mainly as a karaka or as an indicator. And so when the moon joins Venus, literally our mind and our emotions are sort of joined Venus energy, which means a lot, which is a lot of things. It's happiness. It's why it's smiling and all those things I said before. She's Gemini, wanting to connect with others, bring people together, very much a Gemini theme. And the moon is joined Venus, which means his mind and the psychology is very much about Venus energy, which is also about making sure people are happy, comfortable, and, you know, authentically caring about others, but also, again, sexuality. Now, it's also about transforming sexuality, which is the eighth house. Eighth house is about destroying things. So you see this transformation, this destruction and transformation of sexuality as well in his chart. We have to be able to see astrology as processes. Again, where astrologers mess up more than anything is they look at these concepts as like these monolithic tendencies. And then based on our bias or our belief or our relationship with that thing, like based on our relationship with sexuality and transforming it, we project that onto a chart. This is what people can do. Instead of seeing things as a process and as a range of actions and possibilities. So everyone experiences sexuality in some way. Everyone has some type of perverse sexual ideas in some way, because that's just the nature of sex. That's the nature of the ego, and the mind is always going to pervert and distort sexuality in some way and elevate that to something higher in some way at some point. Everything is a spectrum, right? And so, but what I'm looking at when I see someone's chart is I understand their mind. And when you back this up into earlier times in someone's life, different situations, you are going to expect that there's going to be distortions and mistakes made with that, right? And so, you know, I would not be surprised if, you know, this cycle now, this period now, that some secrets are exposed from his past, maybe not only of him covering up sexual abuse, literally, which he's already said that he made a statement and then he said, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, which is not good for the people's pope and the one who wants to talk about things. It's not good. That kind of statement it doesn't put people at ease. We don't say, it's very political. And the pope is a political person. This is why I said you see that popes and kings, monarchs, and I mean literally monarchs like Prince Charles and, you know, Queen Elizabeth, popes and kings are all born, not all of them, but many of them, if not most of them, are born near eclipses. And that you lump them together because popes were like kings in the Middle Ages, and they're political positions. The Catholic Church is like a government. In fact, Vatican City is a government that he presides over. So it was a very political statement, and it's not the statement of someone who is wanting to be transparent, or at least it's not the statement of someone who seems to want to be transparent. And it's left, you know, many people uneasy, and in particular, it's given license to his enemies, which he's made quite a few, to really sharpen their knives. And he's made a lot of enemies with the conservative Catholics because he came out being quite liberal. And again, this is the nature of Gemini, is to be very liberal and to, in many ways, dismantle hierarchies. Take this from a Gemini, right? This is why I said it when I started reading the chart, that Gemini is often not good in hierarchies because they see everything as equal. When Pope Francis gets around any individual, like one-to-one, he doesn't see himself as, I'm the Pope, kiss my ring. No, I mean, as a person in real time, which is what Gemini is. As a person in real time, he sees himself as an equal. It's legitimate because that's the nature of Gemini. Now, he also understands his position and his impact and his influence because he's a representative of something because of all of these powerful yogas with career, this powerful seventh house with these major Raja yogas showing career, even excuse me, weird. Even his ninth house ruler in the ninth house gives him an awareness of his impact. So these are the kinds of situations we find ourselves in. This is in many ways why Gemini in general is good at handling authority. They're one of the best because they see authority like everything else. Gemini is not often easily seduced by power, even if they have a lot of power. One-to-one, they're very much relatable, right? But when they have good karmas for power, they handle power very well. They delegate very well. They try to be very fair, and usually they are quite fair. But this egalitarian dismantling of hierarchies, which he started doing right away, this liberalism, this liberal pope, who is trying to make Catholicism more accessible, has made a lot of enemies in the Catholic hierarchy. And like all political structures and systems, when you become vulnerable, they come for you. And so now he's vulnerable. Once the Ketu Dasha started, he became quite vulnerable. Excuse me. And now he's in Ketu. I wanted to go back to see if a lot of the problems started in Ketu Venus, which would have made sense, because Venus, of course, is the planet of sexuality. And this is when we started seeing some of these issues come out. But now he's in Ketu Sun. Or no, he just started Ketu Moon. That's right, just started Ketu Moon about a week ago. And this is going to be major for him because of rulerships. Now, first of all, we have to understand that Ketu Dasha is very transformative for him because of everything Ketu rules. You want to understand rulerships. That's what makes karmas ripen. Again, to my students that have listened to me, particularly advanced students, you want to see, why is Ketu so powerful? First thing people will do, even after I've taught them this for years, is they'll go, oh yeah, Ketu's in the first house, and Ketu's a malefic, and it's on the ascendant, and it's bad, and it's blah, blah. No, that's not why. His Ketu in the first is extremely powerful. In many ways, that's why he's Pope. All of this powerful knowledge. And again, Ketu is very much about popes and, again, things that are singularities. How many people become Pope? Like, what, there's been 30 of them or something? Ketu is this kind of thing. Very, like, out of this world, something extremely unusual. But no, he became Pope when Mercury Dasha ran, and Mercury rules Ketu and activates that power. Ketu Dasha comes, and you look at what does Ketu rule, particularly if Ketu rules a lot of things, because he doesn't rule any Rashis. He rules nakshatras, and look at all the planets in Mula nakshatra. Now, Ketu also rules Ashwini, and he rules Magha, different nakshatras. Particularly Magha is very powerful. Magha can make you a king. Ashwini makes for very powerful metaphysical healers and healing and all of that. Mula is a very destructive, transformative, difficult nakshatra. One of the most, if not in some ways, the most frenetic and crazy, out of control. It's related to the goddess Kali, which is the manifestation of time spinning wildly and changing and transforming all kinds of issues. And yes, Julio, you're right about the moon as well. And there's something else about Venus that I didn't say, which I was going to get to as well, which is secrets and holding people's secrets. It's not just that it's in the 8th house, but Venus is the 12th lord. It's the 12th lord in the 8th. And it's powerful. And yes, join the 2nd house ruler. So you see all of this keeper of secrets with his 8th house. Ketu Dasha starts, and all of a sudden it starts to unleash a lot of chaos. One of the first things I noticed with his Ketu Dasha, there was a very famous picture, not to get political, about Trump, but there was a picture taken when Trump went to Rome. He took a trip and met the Pope, where you see the Pope, Trump, Trump's wife, and I think it was Ivanka, and they're all standing there. Everyone in the picture is sullen. You see the Pope is like, and Ivanka is like, and Melania is like, and Donald Trump is like beaming. Wild photo, because every other photo, and I didn't even really notice that he had changed from Mercury to Ketu dasha, but I was like, boy, the Pope doesn't look very happy. No one looks happy except Trump in that picture. And the contrast, because the Pope, like you see pictures of him with Obama and Angela Merkel and everybody else, the Pope is always smiling. You see this picture, just like, it's really quite a sad look. But anyway, this is, his Ketu dasha started, and it's been a heavier time. Then you see that the Pope then really changed this, this way of being, for sure. Since the Ketu dasha, I just want to show that picture because it's pretty funny. Here it is. Here's the picture. It's pretty interesting picture there. Doesn't look so happy. Anyway, but so that was, this happened the start of his Ketu dasha. Was this where you could imagine that the next several years, like some heaviness started. So now he's moving from, he's moving into Ketu moon now. So Ketu rules this Mula, stellium, Jupiter, Sun, and Rahu, which again is all kinds of turmoil. Jupiter is his 10th house ruler and his 7th house ruler. Again, 7th house ruler shows our relationship with all other people. Since he's a Pope, he's not married. So this also shows relationship like his business partnerships. And that's really big for Gemini, because business and other partnerships are mixed up with Gemini, because the 7th house ruler is also the 10th house ruler. So Ketu rules his business partnerships, all his relationships with other people, which means the other bishops and popes, all other people in general. The Sun, which is his power. Sun is also the 3rd house ruler, which has to do with desires, happiness and what we want. And he's going into Ketu moon. He just started Ketu moon, which is the 2nd house ruler of speech, values, and it's the 2nd ruler going to the 8th, which is all those secrets that he's been holding. Now again, but the real issue is, what does the moon rule? Again, rulerships. The moon rules Venus and the moon, because they're both in Shravana nakshatra. It's not just what the moon is and where it goes. It's not just 2nd ruler in the 8th. It's the moon itself is the ruler of Venus, which is the Karaka of sex, and the 12th house lord of secrets. Again, literally, the secrets, the things that have been happening behind the scenes, the things that have been happening that nobody has seen, is the 12th house. That's the 12th house. And Ketu literally rules, the moon rules his 12th house ruler, Venus, and the 2nd house ruler of the moon, which is speech. And so, again, the 12th house itself is very important. And when things affect the 12th house, it really shows our vulnerability, especially if we've been lying and deceptive and holding things from people. Those things could come out when we have problems to our 2nd house, to our 12th house. Here's a picture of here's Donald Trump's chart. And we just recently had all these eclipses. I talked about this months ago, that the eclipse cycle was going to be devastating for Trump and exposing his secrets. And damn if it wasn't. All of the secrets that have been coming out, not just his secrets, but how people have been secretly taping him, and secretly all of this stuff that's been exposed for the last couple months. Look at what has been happening with his with these eclipses, here's the go chart, here's where the transits have been. And if we back up the transits here, from his chart, and if you watch this chart here, you'll see how when we back this up a couple months, you'll see this is what he was going through. The whole summer was this Mercury, where all these things, these planets going through his 12th house, exposing his secrets. Because it's his 12th house, but in the case of Pope Francis, it's the 12th house ruler getting activated now. Ketu, which is activating all of these planets in Mula, including his career planets and his relationships with others, especially Jupiter. And also Rahu, which is unpredictability. And now Ketu Moon is activating his 12th lord, and his second lord, and his fifth lord, and Venus, the Karaka. This does not look good. And I'm loath to make predictions like that he's going to resign, but man, this is not good. And let me pull up a new chart, because the other thing we want to look at are the current transits. So these are the current transits, and take a look at what's going over and going through his 8th house right now, and by what degree. This is a case study in karmas and the chart and the dashas and the transits converging. Look at this Moon Venus in his 8th house. Again, you want to also understand, I haven't really even talked about the signs, especially with this 8th house, but it's Capricorn. Again, Capricorn is one of the best signs for keeping secrets, because it's very kind of unemotional. You know, like I use my chart really quickly, you know, like often, and it's good for an astrologer, good for someone who knows a lot of people's secrets, quote, so to speak. People are often so much more worried. Like I'm just uninterested, really. Again, not that I'm not interested in them. I'm totally interested in them, but I'm not fascinated or titillated or tempted in any way to say anything. It's kind of like a doctor seeing people naked. After you've seen enough, you've seen enough. No one's secrets are that interesting to me at this point, as much as they're interesting to the people. Oh, don't tell anybody. Why would I tell anybody? Like, I show up and do it, and then I don't think about it again. I remember it, but I don't make an issue out of it. That's the nature of Capricorn. It's very dry in the sense, it's very practical. It's very just, and so same with Pope Francis. Like, he could very well have he holds all of these secrets that he has for decades, sexual secrets, and he's been holding them and trying to, you know, keep the bigger picture in mind with the Catholic Church and the duties and God and all the stuff that he must have to deal with now as Pope, but all those years as a cardinal and a bishop, and just trying, and just like knowing it's there, trying to do the best thing in the moment, you know, the best practical solution to whatever the situation is that comes up, putting it aside for the good, for the common good, maybe even burying some of his own secrets of improprieties. I think there are going to be accusations of that for sure that are going to come out. Again, look at his chart. He's got these planets at 14 and 19. First of all, Ketu already went over those degrees of that close Moon-Venus conjunction. Mars also went up to it and then went retrograde, but Mars is going to go over them again. But Ketu went over those degrees. If we look at, if we go back and look at Ketu, okay, so go around this time, he was 19. This is March of 2018, and that scandal started, what was it? It started in, was it April? I think that's when the scandal started. We pulled that up, whatever that date was. Let me find that again. it was yeah, it was at least by the spring, we started seeing that, because Ketu in the sky was going over his moon in the natal chart, and then it also went over his Venus, which is probably right around when he issued that statement. Let me pull this up again. Sorry, I'm going back and forth a little bit because I want to get a little bit more of that timing. I'm going to say find the Pope statement. Is August 20th. So on August 20th is when he issued that statement, and if we, just find that day, see what was happening on that day. I don't think that was a good day for him, August 20th. It's 25th. Let me go back day. And so he issued a statement on this day. I wonder how close that was to Jupiter going direct again. So you see that he's really in it. He's really in the soup, right? Oh, that was right near the eclipse, right? Or right, actually not the eclipse, but, oh yeah, August 20th. So the moon would have been at the end of Scorpio into Sagittarius. It would have been around this time that he did it. So at any rate, you see that Pope Francis is really in it right now, and his Ketu moon dasha from now until spring of 2019 is going to be really perilous. And I'm not sure he's going to survive. When we look at some transits here, so right now, this is set. So right now we're here. Let me move this ahead weeks. So right now we're like September 24th, 25th. And as Mars starts to move forward, so October 2nd, Mars is at 12 degrees, getting much closer to that Venus. So there's going to be, again, this, by the next week, through October, it could be very, very contentious. October, it's going to be a hard month for him in October, with Mars going over that natal point, Mars going over his moon, Venus in the 8th house. Again, you want to understand why. It's because of all these factors lining up, especially dashas. Them showed, the first two levels, Ketu and ruling all these planets in Mula, and Moon ruling all these planets in Shravana in his 8th house, combined with these transits of Ketu there and Mars. Those of you who attended my Swiss Army knife workshop weekend saw these themes in action. I talked about this for the whole weekend, where I showed karma's ripening over and over and over again. This is like textbook. By the way, it also could be dangerous, like maybe assassination attempt or something like that. Because the 8th house has to do with murder. And it's dangerous, especially to his work. But it doesn't stop, because Mars then goes over Saturn as well, which is his 9th house, 9th lord in the 9th, which is also, again, perilous to his career and his impact, him as a teacher. And so, again, as a keeper of these secrets, and now these secrets getting exposed and blown up, you can see how his karma as the leader of the Catholic Church, also his nature as being this open, genial person and attracting all these enemies in the church has converged with all of the sins of the church of the past that he's covered up, been complicit in. And these popes, these bishops and cardinals and priests should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, I'm keeping that out of it. But this is beyond disgusting. There are hardly words to express the absolute abhorrent nature of this entire subject. That this is what makes organizations like the church, like any church, hideous. Not, there's the benefit in helping people align with spirituality, but once you get people together and there's power involved and status and, again, hierarchies of influence where you can coerce and manipulate and lord over people, you get this kind of rampant corruption. The bigger the organization, the more the corruption, and the more they circle the wagons at the top. And it starts all the way from the top. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see, and I hope we see, here's my personal point of view. I think Pope Francis at heart is I don't just think, you can see by his chart that he's a truly, all his best intentions and all his foibles and failings, which could include perhaps abuses as well, which is terrible. I'm not so convinced of that, but I wouldn't be surprised. But he's tried to do the best with this church, but I want to see all of it come out. I want to see all of it blown up, evidence, just like we see in investigations of political figures and whatnot. I want to see all the secrets come out. And if it means the church gets blown up, then the church gets blown up. It needs to get blown up if this is what it's doing. And this is the age we live in. This is the age we live in. And it's not separate from what I've been talking about for a year, which is this stuff, which is Rahu in Cancer and Jupiter in Libra. I've talked about this now for a year. In all my updates, when I talk about months and whatnot, of how right when Rahu went into Cancer and then Jupiter went into Libra, we started seeing the Me Too movement. That was very obvious. But we also started seeing sexual victims all around the world finding their voice, speaking out. And this is the latest. In some ways, it could be the biggest and most egregious, because it's not the most, because women have been oppressed forever as well. But the most taboo, hidden, and again, in many ways, just disgusting, because much of this abuse has to do with children. And exploiting the most vulnerable, not just because they're children, but because they're also they're wanting to find God. They're wanting to find their purpose. And I'll tell you, as a teacher, it makes me sick. Exploiting students or people that are, again, not just students, but I mean students too, but vulnerable children. This is horrible. I mean, this is the worst. And it is very much in keeping with the shift that happened from Rahu going through Leo. Again, you want to understand, like I said, popes are kings. It's a monarchy. It's a structure. It's a political, it's like a monarchy. The Catholic Church is like one of the last remaining monarchies. You want to look at it, don't look at it as a religious organization. That's part of it. That's the monarchy, that's the reign. But they are like kings. I'm going to do a case study on popes and kings. I have the charts. I meant to do it a while ago, but I got really busy with other things. But you'll see how kings, which are a monarchy, because they have absolute rule, it's very much like a pope. And their fiefdom or their kingdom is literally the Catholic Church and the subjects in the church, just like a king, the subjects in the kingdom. And they literally even have a, Vatican City. So the shift from Rahu going through Leo, which led to things like Donald Trump getting elected, the rise of nationalism and potential authoritarianism all over the world, shifted last year, like around last September, when Rahu went into Cancer. And I said at the time many times, and have been saying since, that this is going to show a return and a balancing of the wheel toward women's issues, divine mother kind of energy, where we're going to be more compassionate, where we're going to see the emergence of these kinds of ugly things exposed to connect us to a more heart-centered relationship with each other. Again, and then shortly thereafter, Jupiter went into Libra, which is about also women's issues, especially as they relate to sexuality, because Libra is ruled by Venus. Jupiter is still in Libra, by the way. And I'm not done with the case study. In fact, I'm finishing it up now. But the last part of it is going to be when Jupiter goes into Scorpio and how that affects Pope Francis. But all these things have been happening. They've been big issues the last year. And Jupiter now about to go into Scorpio. We're now September. This would be September 25th. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, Jupiter in October, which is when Pope Francis is having the most vicious of these transits, Jupiter is going to go into Scorpio. And we're going to see, we could see some retribution. This is why I said it could be dangerous. From Pope Francis's chart, he's been benefiting from the aspect of Jupiter onto his ascendant. Jupiter has been in the 5th house, aspecting Pope Francis's ascendant and 1st house. So he's been the beneficiary of an auspicious Jupiter aspect since last year, since last September. But that changes when Jupiter goes into Scorpio. It's no longer aspecting his ascendant. When Jupiter goes into Scorpio, it goes through his 6th house, and that means trouble. There's no more gracious aspect. It's stress and difficulty. Combined with Mars going through his 8th house over his moon Venus in the 8th. So again, one of the things that you have to do as an astrologer when you're evaluating things, like I'm evaluating, someone comes to me for a reading. If he were to come to me for a reading and say, this is what's going on, I would, in some ways, you can break things down into simple structures where I want to be looking at, are things going to get better or worse than where they are now? I should be able to see why they're as bad as they are, which I clearly showed you. You could see it. Ketu moon is ruling all of those planets in the 7th and 8th houses. And it's Ketu ruling Mula, which is wild transformation, and moon ruling moon and Venus in the 8th, which shows you've been keeping a lot of secrets, huh? They're getting exposed now, right? Okay, I get it. Then I have to take that moment and project it forward using the dashas and the transits. That's how you see it. And I would want to say, is this going to get better or worse? Better or worse? And in this case, there's really no way it gets better from here for him. There's no way this gets better. Again, this is why I'm trying to show you that you can do, astrology is complicated. You need to be able to manage all of these things. By the way, I am doing my certification course now if you want to learn how to do this. But you have to learn how to organize all this stuff and know what you're organizing. But once you do, then evaluating if it gets better or worse is not as hard. It's hard when you don't know how to organize anything and you don't know what you're looking at. When you know what you're looking at, I just showed you. These transits at this sensitive point, karma's being activated. And then you even see Jupiter moving, releasing his grace, his graceful aspect. And it's been waning. Again, when you go back, when Jupiter was closer to 16 degrees, we'll go back here and back this transit up, and you'll see he was getting more grace when Jupiter was even like, when Jupiter was here in July, right? Because he was aspecting his ascendant. Jupiter really, his grace has been waning since July, August. He released that statement like in August around this time, but the pressure was mounting here because Jupiter was directly aspecting his ascendant. Here, Jupiter was 19 degrees. His aspect is 1649. So this was in the summer, July 17th, right? So he was getting some gracious aspects from Jupiter over the summer. So you say, well, if that's the grace, what's worse than what's been happening over the summer? Oh, there's a lot worse. Because you see, one of the things, as Jupiter started moving away from that that close aspect to his ascendant, as Jupiter started moving away from it, the heat got turned up even more, so much so that he had to release that statement to try to calm things down. That political statement where he said, here's what happened, we're very sorry, blah, 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 the untold damage, and I'm not talking about it anymore. He released that statement, and it has done nothing but turn the heat up even more because Jupiter is separating, it's called a separating aspect from his ascendant. Now, for example, if Pope Francis had his ascendant in Scorpio, let's just say, and he was in the soup that he's in now, I would say, well, there's some things that are going to really improve for you because Jupiter is going to go in your first house in October. So things are going to get easier in October because Jupiter's going in your first house. I can't say that. Jupiter has withdrawn his grace. Your best time to really address this, Pope Francis, would have been when Jupiter was aspecting your ascendant more closely. You could have come out at that time. I would have said, come out now. Put out a clear statement, be forthcoming, be humble, hold space, listen to what's happened. Like, do your best, which it's a hard situation, but do your best now. By being quiet, not saying anything, then releasing that opaque statement, you're just inviting critics, and now you're losing the grace that Jupiter had given. So it's complicated, but it's not that complicated once you can chunk down the variables. But again, that's also hard. So you have to also know what makes karmas ripen. Those of you who watch my videos, you can learn to do this stuff. I mean, if you really want to learn how to interpret these things better, though, you need to get serious training, which I do, and it's not that complicated to learn it. A lot of students have taken, hundreds of graduates, like 300 graduates from my 9-month programs over the last 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years now, where all of it's laid out for you very systematically. And you see all of that come together when we do this kind of case study. So I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I've been quite busy myself. Again, the other transit that I didn't even mention yet, which is also huge, I should have mentioned it earlier, was, of course, maybe some of you guys in the comments did, but it's this big old honking Saturn in his 7th house. So the pressure got really turned up on him in early 2017, which was actually right, which corresponded with that Ketu dasa. He started Ketu dasa at the end of 2016. That's right when Saturn moved into his 7th house, not only his 7th house, but started grinding back and forth over all these planets. So Saturn has been in and out and grinding over these planets, this Rahu sun, and now it's very close to his Jupiter. Look, Look at the exact degrees of Saturn right now. It's like 10 degrees. Well, right now we're September 25th. Look at the degrees of Saturn, 843. Look at his Jupiter, 1033. So in a few weeks, Saturn is going to be right on his Jupiter. Saturn, 10 degrees on his 10th Lord, Jupiter. This is going to happen October 23rd. I'm going to say, having looked at this now, if he survives as Pope, it'll be a miracle. So it's time for that miracle. This is going to be bad, especially this transit. Because Saturn, when Saturn comes calling, it's the accumulation of 30 years karma, 30 years of time, 28, 30 years. We might easily see things come out that happened 28, 30 years ago. That happened, let's say, back in, I can't add anymore, in the mid 80s, perhaps. Maybe some of you who know a timeline, maybe you could Google Pope Francis and mid 80s or something and see. Or like 90s, early 90s or something. The last time Saturn went over this section of the sky, and particularly for him, it would have been going through his 7th and 8th houses. That would be a time where maybe we saw some scandals, maybe with him, maybe that he covered up. Because Saturn comes back and we revisit the karma. So he would have been in Saturn Dasha then as well. So even things, let's go up and look, maybe Saturn Venus Dasha or Saturn Moon Dasha. Let's look real quick. Saturn Venus, Saturn Moon. Again, 87, I just pulled it out of the top of my head. But look, Saturn from late 80s until early 90s. Saturn Venus, Saturn Sun, Saturn Moon. There could have been especially some scandals that he covered up, maybe that he was even involved in or something. And this dirt can get exposed right now. Absolutely. With these vicious transits through his 8th house of keeping people's secrets. Jupiter moving out of the auspicious alignment and Saturn bearing down on his 10th Lord, Jupiter. Doesn't get much more intense than that, particularly even when you look at the nature of the dashas. You know, it's Ketu. And Ketu, again, for him, it's a difficult dasha. It rules all these planets in Mula and the moon also with these planets in the 8th. So it's gone on for a while. So I will... I'll look and see if there's any questions that are maybe interesting to answer. Sometimes I'll scroll through real quick and see. So someone asked why this dasha propelled him. I already explained it. Mercury Jupiter. It rules all those Raja Yogas. So I explained that. So people are blown away. Guess what, folks? This is what my students learn all the time. This is advanced astrology that works really well. I'm teaching these kind of methods at the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference as well. So I've been doing it this way for 15 years. Everything is about rulerships, what the planets rule. And again, not like I need to say this all the time, but I kind of do. This is totally zodiac dependent. Because if it's not, then none of these planets rule these signs and houses. Now, this is nakshatra based as well. So maybe it's a lot of these rulerships are nakshatra based, but not the Mercury catapulting to his career, also not Jupiter ruling Sagittarius. So for the most part, this is totally zodiac based as well. Of course, right from the texts of Vedic astrology where it says Ashwini is at the head of the ram. Aries occupies the same space. It's in every Vedic astrology text. There is no debate about that. When you're doing classical, proper Vedic astrology from the sastras, that's what's there. Okay, it's clearly there. So again, this is the way it works. You know what the planets rule. But again, the real secret sauce in this is understanding these things in great depth. It's easy for it, it's great to follow, but again, pulling out all of the hidden strength and power of the 8th house, of the 5th house, of Venus, the difference between the Karaka and the house ruler, how the transits work, how they aspect, all of this. Again, I've said it before, there's about 20 or 30 things that you really need to dial in. If you dial those things in, you can do it. And those are the things I teach in my certification course. Then there's a lot of nuance that I'm not going into. I could go into a lot of more nuance, but it's the same cycle. It's a repeatable method. And my students that have studied with me know, because they've seen me do it hundreds of times probably now, and they learn how to do it as well. Okay, so someone asked about a time frame. I just said it's happening now. Francis is going to be wait until Jupiter changes signs and moves into Scorpio, and you're going to see, I mean, even now that Mars is moving forward and Saturn is moving closer to that 10th Lord for him. It could be, I would say, especially in a couple weeks when Jupiter goes into Scorpio, we're going to see it accelerate more. You're going to see him in the stew more. But it's happening now. It's ripe now. Look at what's happening. This could blow up at any minute. I don't think it's going to blow up, until Jupiter leaves his 5th house, which is in early October, like I said. And that's just because Jupiter is still protecting his, it's still protecting his karma, so to speak. But definitely, someone says, when are the, when is it going to blow up the Catholic Church? It's already blowing up the Catholic Church, but, I'd love to see let's be clear about something. If the worst comes out, which it could, I'm not saying it will, understand this. I'm not necessarily predicting that he'll resign or anything like that, but he definitely could. And even if he doesn't, it's going to get really, really bad for him. And I also mentioned, and again, I don't like to say these things a lot publicly. I don't like saying this, but his life is also in danger. It's very dangerous. Popes have been assassinated. People tried to assassinate popes. He needs to be very careful. I hope he is getting some good counsel and he actually gets out of the public for a while. Again, he's like the people's pope. He loves to go around and do stuff. He is in danger right now, particularly in October. And it's not a joke. You don't get these transits very often. In fact, the last time that Jupiter went through that all this happened, the last time Saturn went through here, or Mars went through here, or whatever, the last time he had those planets lined up like that, they weren't all lined up at the same time. You don't get Mars going through your 8th house, which in itself is dangerous, going over your moon, which itself is dangerous, Venus, which is dangerous. At the same time, you have Saturn right on your 7th Lord, which is also called a Marika planet in your 7th house. In Ketu moon, Ketu is ruling Mula, and the moon rules Shravana, and these two planets in the 8th house. Look, there are almost everything converging around extreme danger, especially of getting killed. So I don't want that. No one wants that. Even if that doesn't happen, these scandals blowing up are going to blow up more and more. And I think he's going to be on the forefront of this very transformative time in the church. Let's see what the church is after this happens. But I think it's showing a major recalibration. I mean, these things have already been happening, but he's going to be a lightning rod. This has now come to a head with these transits, with this age we live in. And Jupiter going through Scorpio is going to be a comeuppance for a lot of people, not just the Pope. And I'll do a class on Jupiter and Scorpio here real soon to talk about it and what it's meant. And that also includes for political figures and whatnot. But it's real. It's a real deal. And he's going to be on the forefront of this change, and a lot of these secrets are going to come out, I think personally, about him as well. Because it's his secrets getting exposed, because the moon is ruling his 12th house ruler. So we'll leave it at that. This is getting long, of course. And I want to there are a couple other things that don't really have to do with what we're describing here. So someone's asking about eclipse with Jupiter, December 2019. I don't really go that far in the future necessarily in these kinds of things, but I do know about what's coming, especially with upcoming eclipses, and especially Saturn Ketu conjunction is more. I say more. It's equally or probably more, devastating and potentially dangerous, having Saturn Ketu conjunction, and then Jupiter joins it. So we have plenty of time to talk about that. It is just next year, though. So anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out. Share the video. People always say how great it is. Share it on your social media. Let people know. Let people know that it was excellent, that you got a lot out of it, and direct them to watch the video and whatnot. Thanks a lot.